My friends, a few hours before the game Steelers-Ravens decides the top of the AFC North, the entire tone inside Pittsburgh's building has shifted, and it's not just because of the stakes. What's unfolding behind the scenes is a reshaping of the Steelers' passing attack unlike anything we've seen from this team all season. And it all starts with the moves that quietly came down this afternoon, the kind of roster decisions that might end up defining whether this season turns into a surge toward the postseason or another chapter of frustration. The coaching staff didn't just elevate Marquez Valdes-Scantling to the game day roster because they needed another body. This wasn't a routine transaction. MVS is here because the Steelers are preparing to change the way they attack the field. You don't bring up a 6 feet 4 inches burner from the practice squad unless you plan on using his size and straight line speed to threaten a defense that has, frankly, had no reason to fear Pittsburgh vertically for months. And Dylan Cook being elevated as well sets the tone for how thin that offensive line is right now. But the urgency in this wide receiver room is the real storyline. Adam Thielen is the wild card in all of this. He traveled with the team. That alone doesn't guarantee a helmet, but it signals the Steelers believe he might be ready to contribute far sooner than anyone expected. We've seen this coaching staff ramp newcomers up on short timelines before. They did it with Kyle Duggar when they acquired him. And the truth is, the Steelers have wanted Thielen for a long time. They were in on him last trade deadline. They were monitoring him again when Carolina was shopping him. And now, with 5 must-win games left, they finally have him in their building, potentially available for the biggest weekend of the season. What makes this fascinating is not just Thielen's resume, but the specific skill set Pittsburgh is desperate to add. This team has been missing a veteran, physical, route-crafting receiver who can win slants, corners, and intermediate breaks even when defenders get handsy. Roman Wilson and Calvin Austin III have flash talent, but their size limits the type of concepts the staff trusts them to execute consistently. You can see it on tape. Where a corner presses and gets physical, there's not much they can do to fight through it. They're fast, they're shifty, but they're not built for the kind of downfield, combative route running Pittsburgh wants to lean on in this matchup. Thielen, even at 35 and even while acknowledging the decline that caused Minnesota to look elsewhere in moments this year, still brings something the Steelers simply do not have. He reads coverage like a quarterback. He wins through footwork and timing. He knows how to sit down in the soft spots and how to set up a defender in man coverage. He has been a security blanket his entire career, and if he does get a helmet tomorrow, he could instantly become the outlet Aaron Rodgers has been missing every single time he scans past his first read and finds nobody separating. And Rodgers needs that help. The deep ball hasn't been there all season. Accuracy beyond 20 yards has been an issue, and defenses have begun sitting on Pittsburgh's short game because they don't fear anything behind them. When you combine that with DK Metcalf being double-teamed on nearly every weighty down, the entire passing attack has become predictable and suffocated. DK is a 1A receiver, not a true solve-all number one. He can dominate one-on-ones, he can shred zones, but when teams bracket him and no other receiver threatens the field, the offense becomes exactly what we've watched in recent weeks, stagnant and reactive. This is why Thielen and MVS matter. Not because they're guaranteed saviors, but because they allow Pittsburgh to finally mix personnel and concepts in a meaningful way. Instead of trotting out a static trio each drive, the staff can tailor groupings to the specific routes they want to call. Want physicality and boundary toughness? Put Thielen and MVS out there with DK. Want shiftiness and speed? Rotate in Roman and Calvin. It becomes a true concept-driven rotation, and that changes how defenses have to plan. And while all this is brewing, there's another storm brewing in the background. Mike Tomlin's contract situation. The March 1st deadline to pick up his 2027 club option adds a layer of pressure to this stretch that simply cannot be ignored. If the Steelers don't win a playoff game, the conversation changes completely. The possibility of Tomlin entering a lame duck 2026 season, or even the possibility of a trade-out scenario, those are very real outcomes. And the locker room knows it. The front office knows it. The fan base certainly knows it. All of it. Rodgers' inconsistency, DK's isolation, the wide-out rotation, the looming Tomlin decision, funnels straight into tomorrow. A game that decides the division lead now doubling as a game that could define the final chapters of this era of Steelers football. And that's why I want to hear from you. With Thielen potentially active, MVS elevated, and the wide receiver room undergoing this late-season transformation, do you think this new mix can actually spark the passing attack when it matters most? Picking up right where we left off. Because the moment you start digging into what this reshaped receiver rotation means for the Steelers, the next layer becomes even more fascinating. Tomorrow is not just about whether Adam Thielen gets a helmet or how many snaps Marquez Valdes-Scantling sees. It's about whether this offense can finally break the cycle that has limited it all year long. The inability to create consistent spacing and force defenses to defend every blade of grass. The staff knows exactly why the passing game is stalled. When defenses realize Pittsburgh can't attack certain areas of the field, they load up those breaking routes DK Metcalf runs so well, they squat on the underneath concepts, and they dare Rodgers to beat them deep or over the middle with precise timing throws that haven't been there since September. That's why the Thielen addition isn't just a late-season flyer, it's a calculated attempt to resurrect an offensive identity that, for weeks, has felt like it's missing a vital piece. Thielen isn't expected to revive his prime, but he doesn't have to. Pittsburgh doesn't need 120 yards and a touchdown from him. They need the 8-yard third and 6 sit route. They need the back shoulder out against tight man. They need the veteran who can diagnose disguised coverages before the snap and help Rodgers get into the correct concept. And that's where things could shift faster than some fans expect. A quarterback like Rodgers thrives when he trusts his outlets, and this season has lacked that trust. Calibrating timing with young receivers is hard enough in a normal year, but when those receivers have size limitations that restrict certain routes, it makes the offense incredibly narrow. Thielen gives Rodgers a player who sees the field like a veteran, who understands leverage, and who has played in every coverage structure possible. That instantly widens the playbook. And when you widen the playbook, you loosen the defense. When you loosen the defense, suddenly DK Metcalf gets cleaner releases, clearer leverage, and more manageable matchups. And if DK gets easier looks, everything changes. MVS brings a different kind of stress on a defense. He's not going to win with sharp breaks or crafty footwork. He's not going to be the guy you feed on third down. But he'll run the routes that force the safety to backpedal just a step deeper. He'll run that deep post that pulls the corner 2 yards wider. He'll run that sideline go ball that makes a coordinator tell his DB, you cannot let him get on top of you. And even if the ball doesn't go his way, the structure of the coverage changes. That's the hidden value fans sometimes overlook. Sometimes the most important thing a receiver does is stretch the geometry of the field so your other weapons have space to breathe. What we're looking at here is the possibility of Pittsburgh finally creating a complementary trio instead of one star and 2 developmental pieces. DK is the matchup-winning 1A. Thielen is the chain-moving tactician. MVS is the field stretcher. Roman Wilson and Calvin Austin III as the situational spark plugs. It's the kind of arrangement that allows an offense to attack from multiple angles without asking any one player to be something he's not. And with how Rodgers has struggled with accuracy beyond 20 yards, that diversity is critical. Because if you can't threaten deep with precision, you have to threaten deep structurally through alignment, size, speed, and route combinations. And this is the first time all year the Steelers actually have the personnel to do that. All of this ties directly into the Tomlin situation, too. Nobody in the organization would ever publicly admit it, but everyone understands what these final weeks represent. The front office has given Tomlin veterans, given him a high-profile quarterback, given him flexibility at the trade deadline. They have tried to build a win-now roster, and win-now rosters come with expectations. If this team doesn't push into the postseason and win at least one playoff game, the pressure doesn't just quietly fade away. The March 1st deadline on his 2027 club option forces the conversation. You either reward the head coach for turning things around, or you brace yourself for the fallout, possibly even exploring trade scenarios if Tomlin decides he won't coach as a lame duck in 2026. And imagine the weight of that reality walking into tomorrow's game. Picture the dynamic, Rodgers needing to prove he can still carry a team in big moments, DK needing to finally break out against heavy man coverage, the defense knowing it has to steady the ship after weeks of inconsistency, and Tomlin coaching under the most subtle but undeniable pressure of his entire tenure. Add in the debut of Thielen, the elevation of MVS, the revamped receiver plan, and you have a storyline that feels like a crossroads for the entire franchise. This isn't just another Steelers-Ravens game. This is the pivot point of the season. It's the moment where Pittsburgh either stabilizes and builds real momentum, or faces the harsh reality that this roster, this structure, and maybe even this era has reached its limits. And that brings us to the real question as we roll into the final stretch of this story. With everything on the line, new weapons added, roles shifting, and the division crown hanging in the balance, do you believe this revamped passing attack can be the spark that saves the Steelers' season? Rolling straight into the final stretch of this story, because what happens next for the Steelers hinges on whether this new-look offense can actually translate from theory to execution. It's one thing to talk about Thielen's route savvy, MVS's vertical stress, and a concept-driven rotation that finally gives Pittsburgh a strategic edge. It's another thing entirely to see how it holds up in real time, in a rivalry game that historically exposes every weakness you thought you had patched over. This is where the spotlight turns directly onto Aaron Rodgers. For all the conversation about receivers, concepts, and personnel groupings, none of it matters if Rodgers doesn't settle into the rhythm he had during the first 6 games of the season. Back then he was playing near top 10 football, efficient, decisive, composed. But as the weeks went by, the inaccuracies deepened, the hesitation crept in, and the offense leaned more heavily on concepts that lacked teeth. What makes the additions of Thielen and MVS so important is not that they instantly mask Rodgers' struggles, but that they simplify his decision-making in the moments where this offense has been breaking down. A quarterback who trusts his first 2 reads plays faster. A quarterback who knows his outlet will win the route plays more confidently. And a quarterback who doesn't have to manufacture perfect throws just to give his receiver a chance finds the rhythm that makes an offense sustainable. That's what this staff is banking on. Not a miracle, but an ecosystem that helps Rodgers play clean, efficient football, because this team doesn't need fireworks. They need competence. They need consistency. They need drives that don't stall at midfield because nobody separated on second down and nobody finished a contested catch on third. And this is where Thielen's potential impact could be bigger than his stat line. Even if he catches only 4 passes, if 2 of those move the chains, that's transformative for an offense that has too often asked DK to be both the explosive threat and the safety blanket. DK isn't built for that. Few receivers are, but give him space, give him fewer brackets, fewer doubled shells, fewer forced releases into stacked leverage, and suddenly he goes from contained to dangerous. That's the effect a reliable veteran can have on an entire structure. Then there's the concept rotation this staff seems ready to embrace. For the first time all year, the Steelers can create matchup-specific groupings without tipping their hand. Roman Wilson becomes your motion specialist, your quick-hitter threat, your jet and slot seam runner. Calvin Austin becomes your design space weapon, the guy you isolate on option routes or use to chase linebackers horizontally. MVS becomes your deep geometry manipulator, pulling safeties and forcing corners into uncomfortable leverage. Thielen becomes your leverage reader, your down and distance stabilizer. And DK remains your primary stress point, the Batman who doesn't have to do everything alone anymore. That kind of layering is how competent offenses win in December and January. That's how you steal possessions, how you control pace, how you keep your defense fresh, and how you stay alive in close games. And make no mistake, this final stretch will be nothing but close games. Baltimore, 2 more divisional matchups, and the lingering reality that every win or loss shifts the conversation around Mike Tomlin's future. And that future matters more than ever. Because if this offense comes alive, if the receivers click, if Rodgers steadies, if the Steelers take the division and punch their playoff ticket, then suddenly that 2027 club option doesn't look like a dilemma. It looks like continuity. It looks like belief. It looks like earned stability instead of inherited stability. But if the offense sputters again, if the same old problems resurface, if Pittsburgh drops these crucial games and misses the postseason, or worse, gets in and loses early, the Tomlin question becomes impossible to ignore. Does he accept the lame duck 2026 season as a challenge, as a final push alongside Cam Hayward? Or does he decide the chapter is closed and explore a trade to a team like the Giants, where he could reset expectations and resume with a new front office and a top draft pick? It all comes back to the next few weeks, to the passing game finding life, to Rodgers rediscovering rhythm, to receivers executing their roles, to an offense that has looked incomplete for months finally starting to look intentional. And that's why tomorrow isn't just another game, it's the true beginning of the Steelers' final test. A test of identity, a test of philosophy, a test of whether this team can turn its season back toward the path they believed they were on in September. If you're still with me, here's all I want you to do. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe this revamped defense is enough to rescue the season? Do you trust Rodgers with these new weapons? And do you think this late push can shape the future of Mike Tomlin in Pittsburgh? Jumping straight ahead, because there is still one more layer to this story that deserves attention, the emotional pulse running underneath all of this. You can analyze route concepts, personnel usage, contract implications, and quarterback mechanics, but none of it exists in a vacuum. This locker room feels the weight of what's coming, and the truth is, late-season pivots like the one Pittsburgh is attempting don't just test talent, they test belief. This team has been through turbulence all year, injuries, inconsistency, external noise, internal doubt, and when a season reaches this point, when every remaining game feels like a career-defining referendum, you find out who buys in and who checks out. You find out whether a veteran quarterback like Rodgers can rally the room instead of letting frustration simmer. You find out whether a group of receivers, some young, some newly arrived, some fighting for relevance, can come together and execute roles that may be brand new to them in the most hostile environment imaginable. And you find out whether a head coach like Mike Tomlin, with his future uncertain for the first time in nearly 2 decades, can still command a team through chaos chaos the way he always has. Because make no mistake, this is chaos. Good chaos, maybe. Necessary chaos. But chaos nonetheless. You don't overhaul route structures, redefine receiver roles, elevate veterans off the practice squad, and drop in a 35-year-old receiver days before the biggest game of the year unless you're trying to spark something. And sparks can burn bright, or not ignite at all. Inside that building, players know the stakes for Tomlin as clearly as any fan. They know the conversations happening around the league. They know the implications of March 1st. They know that missing the playoffs or flaming out early shifts the franchise's direction in ways that go beyond X's and O's. A late-season surge doesn't just save a season, it can reshape the future of the locker room, the quarterback room, the coaching staff, and the long-term vision of what this team wants to be. And sometimes, that pressure is exactly what pulls a team together. Sometimes it's the moment when veterans stop worrying about snap counts and start worrying about legacy. Sometimes it's when rookies stop thinking about mistakes and start thinking about opportunity. Sometimes it's when a team that's been stuck in neutral finally realizes it has nothing left to lose and everything left to prove. And that's why this particular Ravens game carries a different weight than the rest. Not because of the standings, not because of the rivalry, but because it's the first time all season where the Steelers aren't just playing for week-to-week survival, they're playing for the direction of the franchise. The new receiving rotation represents more than tactical adjustments. It represents a refusal to let the season fade quietly. It represents a final push, a final attempt to maximize what this roster can be at its best, not settle for what it has been at its worst. And if it works, if Rodgers finds rhythm, if DK finds single coverage, if Thielen finds space, if MVS finds daylight, then everything feels possible again. But if it doesn't, then the questions get louder, the decisions get heavier, and the future becomes a very different conversation. So now I'm turning it back to you one more time. With everything at stake, Tomlin's future, Rodgers' rebound, DK's usage, Thielen's debut, MVS's elevation, and the entire trajectory of this season, do you believe this team can rise to the moment? Picking up immediately, because there is still more to unravel from this moment the Steelers are stepping into, a moment that is bigger than a single game, bigger than a single roster move, and bigger than any isolated storyline. What Pittsburgh is attempting right now is the kind of late-season reinvention that only happens when a team recognizes it is standing at the edge of two different futures. And whichever way they fall will not be subtle. It will define the entire trajectory of the organization. When you add a veteran like Adam Thielen this late, when you elevate Marquez Valdes-Scantling with the intention to actually feature him, when you reshape the route structure to accommodate a new identity, you are signaling that staying the same is no longer an option. That matters. It matters in the locker room, it matters in the meeting rooms, and it matters on the field. Players understand that when a coaching staff starts moving pieces like this, it means urgency has crossed into necessity. It means the old way was no longer sustainable. And whether they admit it publicly or not, players also feel the ripple effect that comes with Tomlin's uncertain